Hey tech enthusiasts, welcome back to Big Tech Interviews, your place for mastering the SQL interview. Today's video is brought to you by the letter D, as in don't stake your beard against a highly competitive sibling in a canoe race. Today we're going to be talking about the interview process in general, data analytics interviews with the big tech companies, how to get through them, survive them, and thrive in them. So we'll go over a few things like standard interview prep stuff, typical data analyst questions, behavioral type things, and getting yourself prepared for the SQL portion of the interview as well. Don't want this to be a super master class in interview prep, not a 2-hour seminar. I'm going to fit in here just the things that you can keep in your head as you walk through those doors or turn on that camera to get ready for the interview and make sure you know what you're doing. So let's go. All right, so we're going to do a few sections here. Some of it's going to be general and some of it's going to be specialized, but really what we want to focus on is how do you make sure this interview goes well? There are a couple of things that a lot of people know, be polite, be informative, that sort of thing. But let's make sure we cover everything in specific and get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty with what's actually going to see you some success in these. I've done a lot of interviews, more than I can count, some for attempting to get a job and some for hiring people into a job that I had, and seen a lot of different things. This is going to be sort of that distilled knowledge that will help you get through it. So preparing for the interview, right? Standard steps, common questions, general readiness, right? This is going to apply to every interview really. Mock interviews. Do some mock interviews, practice with a friend. If you happen to know somebody who's in HR or is in a hiring position and they can actually perform what they would consider to be a standard interview for you, that's great too. There are some videos online as well that can ask you direct questions and you can pretend to answer, even though it's not a live video conference. It's still kind of a great practice, so you want to get some mock interview practice under your belt. You also need to practice your code. Most of these interviews are going to ask you to do a live coding exercise, and while it seems fairly daunting, as you can see from some of our other videos, they're not impossible. They're not so challenging that you can't get through them unless you're an absolute expert, perfect for the role. A lot of people can get through these interviews and we'll help you do that, of course, but practice your code on the side. If you're not working on SQL code, on Python code, if you're not working with databases in your spare time, then it's just a professional hobby for you, not lifestyle hobby. So work on it on the side, find a reason, find a project to get some code going. Do your research as well. I mean, we'll say this for almost every interview that you could go on, but especially for the tech interviews. Understand the company you're going to go interview at, and if you can, find information on the person with whom you'll be interviewing, right? Figure out what products they develop and try to imagine for yourself what kind of challenges they could be incurring or what technical advances they'd like to make with what they're doing. If possible, network, right? Go up onto LinkedIn, onto Facebook, onto those types of places and see if you can connect with any of these people and ask them about the role. But do the research, figure out what they're working with. You don't want to be put on the spot being asked, well, how can you help us? And not know exactly what it is they need help with. This will not be a clinch point in every interview, but it's still good to be prepared for this kind of question. Do the research, know who you're going to go work for. Be early. I'll just be brief here on this one. Be early. That's it. I mean, get to the door 10-15 minutes ahead of time. Get to the camera and dial into the conference at least 5 minutes ahead of time. Not only because it demonstrates that you have set aside your time for them, and their time is very valuable to them, but it also means that if there's any problems, like you need to find a room or you've got a technical glitch with your equipment, you can get that solved and still get to the interview on time. So do that. Set the tone. Right? I mean, when you appear before the camera or you appear in person, you want to dress nice. If you can get some of that research done in advance so that you know whether or not it's somewhat casual or if it's definitely, straight lace, necktie, that sort of thing. That's good to know, obviously, in advance. But also make sure that you don't have a lot going on in your background or that it's a quiet setting, right? Because they are giving you the opportunity to present yourself and you want to respect that. You set the tone and say, I'm here for an important reason that I value. Demonstrate that in the way you behave, in the way you comport yourself, right? But also copy the tone. And that means if they're kind of like jovial and having fun and laid back, and maybe they're wearing hoodies at work or something like that, it's okay to get a little relaxed and mirror their tone a little bit. But if they're straight-laced and sitting up in their chairs and, they're very, very serious, make sure you do the same thing because they're looking for for somebody who's going to fit in. And also, it's just a sales tactic, the mirroring technique, right? Have copies. Have copies of your resume. Now, if you're doing an online interview, video interview, digitally, they've already been given a copy of your resume. They almost certainly have it in front of them while they're interviewing you. If you're going to an in-person interview, bring copies of your resume so that as you walk in, you can hand them to them. They may already have a copy, but now they have another one and they have to do something with that. And in order to do something with it, they have to think about who you are. Just kind of force that on them, prompt that. But make sure, because they may need a copy of it. Or it may be that they received an abridged version of your resume because you wanted to keep it down to 1 or 2 pages, but you have a sort of full CV that you'd like to give them the opportunity to review during the interview. That's also a great opportunity. This last one here, I like to call this the talk like a pirate, right? Because it's R, it's a bunch of R's. R. Restate, respond, and recap. So what I mean by this is when they're talking to you, when they ask you a question in particular, restate the question. Not, so what is your name? Well, my name is blah, 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 blah. I mean, you don't have to do it with everything. But when they're asking you something complicated, restating what they've asked you to think about demonstrates that you heard them, that you were listening, you were attentive, and you understood. Then respond. Tell them what your response would be, what your action would be, how you would approach something, or if they're asking you a very general question, like let's say something like about your educational background, just give them the information and then recap. You say, and that's, that educational process I feel really benefited me, or recap and say, and that's how I would solve a problem like that given the sort of constraints that you described, or something like that. Recap, because the recap always lets them know that you weren't trailing off, you weren't trying to go somewhere else, you weren't getting distracted by the question, you understood what the point was and you did solve it. Common questions with uncommon answers. Tell me about yourself. So I put this one up right away because I want to show you. We're about to talk about some questions for which you need to be very prepared, because they happen all the time. They happen in a lot of interviews. You don't want to be asked a question like this and go, well, and have to come up with an answer. You want to know about these. So I'm going to list a few off here. Go online and find some more, and make sure you're ready for each one of these. It's just like preparing for a debate. It's just like preparing for a speech, for just about anything. You want to have some of these answers canned and ready to go. So tell me about yourself. You don't have to go into great detail. Certainly you shouldn't necessarily think of this as an opportunity to talk yourself up. They are not asking you, what are your strengths and weaknesses? That's actually coming up. They are not asking you, why are you better than everybody else we're interviewing? They're just asking you about yourself. They want an honest, candid answer. Tell me about yourself. I like to code in my spare time. I find databases are useful for a lot of the types of projects that I tend to work on when I'm at my computer, that is anyway. But beyond that, I like spending time with my family and mountain biking. And, I have a really tenacious attitude. I like projects that challenge me. So right there, I gave you 3 sentences. It took less than 20 seconds, and it told you that I'm a hard worker. I know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm about. I'm confident. I know how to solve problems. Done. If they need to know more information, they'll ask a follow-up question. So here we go. What's your greatest strength or weakness? And this is a question that can trip some people up because you're not sure what to say, right? Do you do a backdoor compliment? Well, some people say I'm too perfect. Don't say anything like that. They will see right through it. You're not fooling anyone, okay? What are your greatest strengths and weaknesses? It's okay to be honest, but certainly don't be dragging yourself through the mud either. If somebody asks me personally what one of my weaknesses are, I say honestly, well, I tend to get impatient with the development process sometimes. I like to see things completed quickly because there's a lot to do. And if we have effective time management, then that's never a problem for me. So right there, I demonstrated that yes, I do have a weakness. Yes, it is something that can come up when working in a team environment, but I don't consider it a big enough problem to actually impede my work, and I know what the solution is. There's your answer. What's your greatest strength? How would I answer that question? Well, let's see. I would say, I think my greatest strength is that I learn from my mistakes. I do occasionally make a mistake. It doesn't happen too often, but when I do, it's a learning experience. It's always been a learning experience for me, and I'm able to adapt from that and employ that in the next time I make the solution, especially if I'm surrounded by team members who can keep me honest and keep me accountable, because then I get to lean on their great skill sets as well. That's a perfectly good answer. I'm a team player. I'm capable of learning. I'm not shy in the face of adversity. I'm able to collaborate. I'm able to adapt, and I'm trainable. I said all of those things. So think about this kind of stuff. Why do you want to work here? This is a loaded question. Sure. Yeah. They don't need to know why you want to work here. Why do you want to work here? Because you need a paycheck and they offered you an interview. Okay, we all know that. But why do you want to work there? Well, if you did your research, like in the last couple of slides, you could have an answer. You could say, I feel like you guys are working on some really innovative concepts and I'd like to be a part of that. You could say something, well, it sounds a little cheap to say, but it is technically okay to say, like, for example, I've always wanted to be a part of a company with this much reach and influence, right? I said that in my Nike interview. You know, I wasn't exactly excited to work at Nike. I was happy that they wanted to offer me a position there, but I didn't need to specifically work at Nike. But I definitely was excited at the concept of the different kinds of projects that they must have going on, right? And I wanted to be a part of that development. So I was honest about that. So why do you want to work here? You don't necessarily have to pat them on the back, but definitely give them a reason why you think that it's going to be beneficial for you to be there. And if you can sneak in a little bit of why it's going to be beneficial for them that you're there, so be it. What makes you a good fit? This is like that question, you know, they want to know, how are you going to be an asset to us? How are you going to contribute? Why should we choose you over someone else? But also, it does mean what makes you a good fit. Like, how are you going to work with our team? How are you going to develop according to our paradigms and our rules? So, you know, just explain to them the sort of general type of things like, you know, well, you know, I'm a team player. I work well with others. I adapt easily and I know the technology well. And I have a hunger for accomplishing tasks and learning from things. And I feel like I can do that. So I snuck in a little compliment to them as well, right? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Don't say celebrating the 5th anniversary of my first paycheck with you guys. Funny, but they're not going to think so. Right? What they're asking with this question is, do you have drive? Do you have ambition? Are there things that you actually want to achieve? Or do you really kind of not know what you're doing and you're just kind of moving from one thing to the next? You don't have to say anything work related with this. You could say, in 5 years, I see myself hiking up Mount Hood or competing in a triathlon or something like that. You know, that's fine, because all they want to know is that you think towards the future, that you're goal-oriented. What do you know about our company? Hopefully you did the research. You need to know something about where you're working. I mean, what do they do? What are they trying to accomplish? If you get stuck with this one, you can definitely say something like, well, I've learned a little bit in my research since I first heard about the position being available, but I'm definitely excited to learn more. They may just start explaining to you what they do right then and there. I've had that happen several times. So there's a neat little trick for you. And what attracts you to the position. If you can't specify something about this particular position with this specific company, then at least talk about the role. Presumably you've done the role before. If you haven't, and this is your first kind of data analytics type position, then just describe why you're excited to get into it. I have a passion for this kind of technological solution. I enjoy working on these kinds of problems. They challenge me, they invigorate me, and I feel like there will be a lot of growth opportunity here. There's a perfectly fine answer for you. We've talked about some of the general stuff and how to get through them. Let's talk about where the pitfalls are, right? What happens when you say the wrong thing or you're not sure what to say? Some pitfalls are being too technical. Read the room. That's what this says. Are you in the technical portion of the interview? Yes or no? Are you interviewing with a hiring manager who is just leading a team of developers? Or are you interviewing with a hiring manager who is themselves a developer and quite well knows the technology? So don't get too technical unless the room calls for it, unless you're in front of the right people and you are actually trying to demonstrate those skills. You don't necessarily have to describe every protocol, every programming language, every interface, every application, every API. You know, you don't have to describe everything you know about how to do what you're about to be hired to do, unless you're in that portion of the interview that actually necessitates it. On the other hand, you can be not technical enough. They could be asking you for a solution, like how would you solve this database problem? And if you say something really common like, well, I would examine the execution for bottlenecks and determine whether or not a procedure or a windowed function might be the best solution. That's not a technical enough answer. You know, they might be looking for actually how would you solve this problem? Like what would be your steps? If you're not sure, ask. Are you asking, you know, generally for this kind of situation as it tends to happen, or are you describing a specific problem that you guys have? And then maybe they'll go into more detail for you and you can give a better answer that way. Not enough examples is another common pitfall. If you can't draw on your past experience, either professionally or with just tooling around on your own projects at home, then they don't necessarily have the confidence to say you have been exposed to this often enough to be able to handle it without needing supervision. So make sure you have some examples ready. Think of past projects that you've worked on at home or in the workplace. Think of, just like with the whole debate prep concept mentioned earlier, think of different scenarios that you've encountered and have those canned and ready as responses, as examples. You know, you want to think of examples of when you face difficulty with a technical environment. You want to think of examples of when you faced a problematic coworker, right? And trying to work on a team with them. You want to think of examples where you had difficult expectations set and how you managed that, or an overbearing task workload. How did you handle that scenario? Try to think of a bunch of these and come ready with them. Another pitfall is assuming that you have all the information. You don't. You've never worked at this company before. They'll have a lot of problems that you have faced before at other jobs, but they'll have a lot of problems you haven't. So don't assume you know everything. Right? Ask them questions, say, well, what do you mean by that? What kind of issues are you facing? Or what is your database problem? Is it that certain procedures are slowing down, or is it that your ETL process is taking far too long and that's delaying your reporting, or what have you? Don't just assume, ask. Don't discount the value of other contributors. This pitfall tends to happen accidentally because you're in the interview and you're talking yourself up a lot. But make sure that you bring reference to the fact that you will probably be working on a team. I have often discussed the success of various projects based on my own virtues, but I had added in comments about how I had contributory teammates that were able to help carry it across the finish line, or provided me with the missing piece, or at least did a code review that helped me make sure that I was on the right track. Also mentioned things like side statements that accidentally mention you're excited to work on a team, like saying things like, I look forward to the opportunity to interface with some others that have skills different than mine, because I may be able to add those skills onto myself. I've actually said that. I am not a mathematician or a statistician, but I will commonly say in an interview, you know, there are some data scientists out there who have a little bit more advanced statistics, mathematics under their belt than I do, and I've always wanted to incorporate that into my current skill set. So I look forward to, you know, working with that kind of group. That's good. Another pitfall, complaining about technical constraints. Don't do it. Don't say, well, we were trying to work on this project, but the problem is the server was just out of date and it was too slow, or we wanted to have this kind of ETL process, but the client wanted to only use, you know, this one they were paying for, blah, blah, blah. Don't talk about it. Those are all excuses. A good developer either is aware enough about the technology to be able to predict what kind of constraints will cause them issues and plan around them, or knows how to circumvent them, right? That's what they want to see. They don't want to see that if you encounter a computer that's too slow, you're not going to be able to work on it. That's not going to work for you. It's not going to work for them. Another final pitfall, presuming data integrity. Don't assume that all of the information can be trusted and is accurate. Everybody's got problems with their data. This pitfall generally applies to the technical portion of the interview, where you need to ask some specific questions about how the data arrived where it is and what it means and that sort of thing. But you can't always just say, this is good enough to work with. I love, when I'm interviewing someone, I love a question like, where does this data come from? How does it get ETL'd into the system that I'm using? How does the sales team collect this data? You know, that sort of thing. I love those questions because it means that they're thinking about the end-to-end solution. They're thinking about the total problem. What if the report's not loading in the required amount of time because the system's having too hard a time transforming all of that data into the correct data types? Whereas if we had just done that higher up in our ETL pipeline, we wouldn't have that problem. Because I have encountered a situation where a report wouldn't load because it was based on a procedure that an analyst wrote to properly transform the data so that it could be used in the visualization software. And I looked at the analyst and I said, why didn't you just have the ETL team do that for you when they loaded it? So don't presume data integrity. Our last little bit here, behavioral questions, right? I mean, we're going to talk about some technical stuff in a minute here, but these behavioral questions, they pop up in every interview, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to find out what is your temperament like? How do you respond to situations, to stress, to conflict, that sort of thing? So I have some do's and don'ts here for you. This is just in general, and then we'll talk about some specific questions. So do be honest, obviously. If you lie about who you are or how you would behave, then you're going to have to keep lying while you're in the job, and that's going to create a stressful situation. And then when someone finds out, and they always do, you're done. So be honest from the get-go. Draw from experience if you can when you're answering these questions. If they ask you a behavioral question, how would you respond to this situation, or how do you feel about this kind of situation? Bring something up where that actually already happened as an example, because not only then do you not have to think, well, what would I do? You don't have to conceptualize, because you can simply retell a story. But they also get an example then of how you've already handled it instead of a hypothetical. Do pause to think about it, just for a minute though. Don't spout an answer out immediately if you don't have an answer immediately. It's okay to think about it for a second. You really need to soak it up and take in and understand, okay, so what are they asking me here? Like, when did that happen? You know, if you start talking before you've prepared your answer, you're going to find yourself in the middle of a sentence with nowhere to go. Do describe your action, not someone else's. That's on the other side. See how it says don't describe someone else's action? Don't describe what someone else did. Describe what you did. What did you do? How did you feel? How did you react? What action did you take? What resolution did you bring about? Because they want to know about you. They're not interviewing anybody else. They're interviewing you. And do give a solution-oriented answer. Try to answer a behavioral question in such a way that you can describe that you were brought to a solution. You know, if somebody asks you a behavioral question like, how do you deal with conflict? That's pretty general and open-ended, but you can describe, you can say, I'm going to do several of these at once. I'm going to draw from experience, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to describe my action and give a solution-oriented answer. So how do you deal with conflict? You know, I recently encountered a situation where a coworker disagreed with me on the proper solution to some code that we needed to deploy. What I decided to do was I came up with actually a couple of different options for how we could write that code and demonstrated alongside each one its pros and cons, so that we could decide together. And when we still weren't able to fully agree, I had at least the information ready and available to take to a superior for them to make a solution, and it was an informed solution instead of an opinionated solution. Didn't throw my coworker under the bus, didn't say they did anything wrong, didn't say I did anything particularly right, just described what I did. I solved the problem. There's my answer. So don't try to impress. If you're at this stage of the interview, they already want to know what you have to say. You don't have to try to impress them. You do want to stand out from the other interviewees, but if you try too hard, they're going to smell it. So just don't try. Be impressive. Don't ask for more details. This is in regard to being asked a behavioral question. If they don't give you enough context or enough details or enough information, don't give them a fully contextualized answer. Don't say, well, what do you mean? Does it happen in this situation? Or, you know, what's the scenario with the coworker? Are they having trouble with something or what? You don't need the extra details. They just want to know. Because chances are they don't have the extra details. And if you ask them for them now, they have to stop and think, well, okay, what does this scenario actually look like? No, they just want to know how you react to what they said. Don't fabricate an answer. This is different than being honest, and this is different than lying. This is making up something that sounds right, okay? If you don't have a good, strong answer, say something like, you know, honestly, I'd probably have to think about that because it's not a scenario I encounter a lot, but I like to think that I would blah, 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 and then you can postulate. Don't describe somebody else's action. We just did that, and don't qualify the scenario. Don't ask under which situation is this happening. Don't ask, am I going to get fired if I don't do it? Don't ask any of those situations. They just want to know what's your response. So let's look at a couple. So a peer has reviewed your code submission and found errors. You access the review to fix the code, but don't fully understand why it's incorrect because it ran fine while you were testing it. How do you respond? Understand from this question that they're not necessarily asking you what you're going to fix about your code or what you're going to do about the coworker. They want to know how you handle the fact that there is a conflict. You think your code's right, somebody else says your code's wrong. This is a good one to be prepared for because it happens in the workplace all the time. So what you want to do is say something like, well, I would carefully review it. I'd test it again. I might ask to test it on their computer or on their system or wherever they ran the test so that I can see if the error is related to the environment it's running in. And if I continue to find errors, then I would have to go and review why it's not working and perhaps upgrade my testing process, test on more environments than one. If it appears to be working despite what they said said, I might ask them to clarify so that I understand what the issue actually is, so that I can make sure that it's not something I missed. And by answering it that way, I shift all of the blame away from it's nobody's fault at this point. It's not the coworker's fault and it's not my fault. It's something that needs to be explored. Not only that, but I didn't get frustrated, I didn't get upset, and I didn't assert that I was correct. That's a good way to answer this question. And this one I really wanted to get to. Describe a time, or if you don't have one, imagine one, that the client changed requirements on you while working on a project, and detail how you adapted. This happens all the time. You're gonna face it. People want to know that you're adaptable. They want to know that you're able to make changes when you're asked. If you don't have an experience to draw on for this one, and I mean a positive one, then just imagine, how would you deal with somebody coming in the middle of your project and saying, actually, I want you to do it a whole different way? Nobody really likes that. The key to questions like these are to suspend ego entirely and work towards the solution. That's what the interviewer wants. They want to know, hey, we're not gonna have a problem here, are we? There are some really creative ways to answer this question. You might do something like say, well, I would go back to the client, I would show them the amount of work that's been done and the solutions that we've been able to come up with so far based on the amount of work that they've paid for at this point. Ensure that I fully understand what it is they're trying to accomplish and whether or not a change in requirements is actually necessary or if it's a new feature request. Or you could say something like, I would go to the client and I would say to them that we can make these changes, but I estimate it's going to cause this much of a disruption or this much of a delay. Are you sure you still want us to go forward with it? You're putting the impetus on the client at that point, and the client always likes that. They want to make the decision. Even though you're the one writing the code, they're the ones writing the checks. So they want to make the decision and you let them. You put it on them. You say, well, this is going to delay you and it's going to cost you more money. If they accept that, it's all on them. You go back to your desk and you continue to get paid. You just got some more job security for an extended period of time, for however much longer the project's now going to take. If they say, no, that's unacceptable, then you get to have a conversation with your client, your stakeholder and your project manager and say, well, this is how much we can reasonably do based on the resources that we have right now. So either it's possible or it's not. And then the decision's out of your hands. Somebody else now has to decide. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? Are they going to spend more money to hire more people to cover the amount of man hours that it's now going to take to do this in the same timeline? Or the overtime that it's going to take to do it with the same amount of people? Or are they going to figure out how to build a flux capacitor so that they can go back in time and start over? Or are they going to go back to the client and say, you're being unreasonable, you're asking for something we can't do? Or what? It's now not your problem. But what you demonstrate by answering the question that way is that I don't get to decide whether or not this is reasonable. I've been asked to do a thing, and so long as I am open, honest, and clear about whether or not and how I can do that thing, I'm good. I'm still gonna do the work. The other thing they want to know from this question is, can you change projects easily? Can you drop code you've been working on for months and work on something else instead? If you say yes, you're golden. If you say no, then maybe practice that. Let's move on to the technical portion. We'll try to be quick because we're already a little over a half an hour here. What I want to show you is this SQL Fiddle code project. I've got the link up on screen there. We'll try to get it in the description, and we'll take a quick look at that. It will highlight for you some of the do's and don'ts of the coding portion of the interview. All right, so here's that DB Fiddle that I put on the screen a minute ago. DB Fiddle is kind of cool. It's a website where you can build up your schema by actually creating tables and putting values into them, and then you can write queries to work with it. So it's very similar to the Big Tech Interviews website. In this case, it doesn't necessarily have the ability to correct you or determine that you got a correct answer. It's more for sending examples to your friends or practicing if you don't have a database system in place for you right now. What we're going to look at here is, and some of you aficionados will recognize my penchant for science fiction and comic book fandom in the names that I've got here. We're going to look at these tables and we're going to look at some of the kinds of questions that you might get. And I will tell you, this example, this exact link that you clicked on to get here, and look at this, I've had for over 10 years. I have used this to interview people. So this is going to be a great practice exercise for you. So we have a challenges table. It's got, well, what would be a list of named challenges. And we see these created at, updated at, and deleted at fields on each one. That's going to be our CRUD, right? So that's when it was created, updated, and deleted. This is literal information about the record itself. Not necessarily when the goal was created or when the name of the challenge was created, but when the record was created in this table. And as you can see, it defaults to now for when it gets touched and null for deleted at, but that could be updated to something else later. This is called a hard or a soft delete. This is a good concept for you. A hard delete is when you actually remove the record from the table. You delete from challenges where whatever. A soft delete is when you use the deleted at field to mark a row as having been deleted, but you want to leave its data and information there. And then what happens is in your procedures and in your queries and such, you make sure you filter things out if deleted at is not null, because those are deleted. There are reasons for using this. We're not going to go into it super challenging here, but I just wanted you to be aware of this and work with it a little bit. So we've inserted some challenges. There are different like virtues and such that they may have. There's a goal for each one. We're giving each one an ID number. Okay, so that's great. Oh, and then challenge number 3 is soft deleted right away. And we have some player scores, name of the player, the date of the challenge, what score they got, and then some information about them like their faction, their origin, and their challenge ID, which as you notice has a constraint referencing the challenges table. So that's your foreign key with some more CRUD. Okay, so here's a couple of questions on the right over here. Example test question. How many players from each origin met or passed the goal for each challenge? To understand this, what you need to know, grouping based on requirements, right? How many players from each origin met or passed the goal for each challenge? So we're going to have to end up grouping by some things like names and challenge IDs and such, and then we're counting and we're using a where clause. All right, this looks complicated, but it might only take you about 5 minutes to write this out. This is just a simple select query. Here's the rub for you guys. I'm not going to do any of these on screen like I normally do, because I want you to go and work these out and try these challenges. But I am going to talk about each one and what you need to pay attention to when you're doing the coding exercise for this question. So let's look at this one. Write a statement to soft delete, which means changing the deleted at field to a not null value, any player scores where the challenge was also deleted or the player missed the goal by 50% or worse. So how would you go about solving this? And I wrote these requirements out very specific so that they could be answered easily. What you basically want to say, I'm going to have to take my list of player scores and they have challenge IDs in them, and I'm going to have to compare that to my challenges table. And if anybody has a score for a challenge that's been soft deleted, which we know is ID number 3, but let's say we didn't know that going in. So we'd have to join on our challenges table and go where challenge deleted at is not null. So that's one we'll want to delete. Or another situation where we want to do a soft delete, the player missed the goal by 50% or worse. So when we join the challenges table on, we'll have the goal and we'll have their score. So we'll need to do a little bit of math and say if they missed by 50% or worse, right? So if they're 50% or lower than the goal, then that needs a soft delete as well. This can be done with a single update statement, I promise you. Give that a try. Now that you've done that, indicate the highest scoring player from each challenge and show the name of that challenge. If there are any ties, resolve with the player who had the highest average score to goal percentage across all challenges. What is this going to require? Right away you can tell it's going to require a little bit of CTE work. You're going to have to do another query to get some information ready to resolve those ties if you need to. So in the first place, you can get the highest scoring player from each challenge by simply saying, select my challenges, join the players on, rank, give me the ones that are the top 1, or rank the players by challenge ID, give me the top 1, and then join that onto the challenges where the rank is equal to 1 or what have you. Because you also need to show the name of that challenge. You can't simply do a group by max on this. You need to be able to do the join so that you can get the name of that challenge as well. Now, if there are ties, resolve with the player who had the highest average score to goal percentage across all challenges. So you need to perform a separate query against the player's scores table and say, who's got the best run? right? Who has the best average score to goal? I'm going to bring in my player scores. I'm going to bring in my challenges for each player. I'm going to compare their percentage of their score to their goal. And then for that player, I'm going to take all 4 or 5 of those, or however many there are, because remember, you need to exclude the challenges that were soft deleted. I'm going to take all of those and say, well, what's your average? How well do you do on average? And then rank that, and then use that result to resolve the ties from your first result. It's going to take a couple of steps, but it's going to test your ingenuity. And finally, which team had the highest percentage of players beating the challenge goal for each challenge? Now, read this carefully. The first thing that you'll end up needing to do is taking every challenge, comparing all of the players who took that challenge, figuring out how many of the players who took the challenge beat the challenge. That's your percentage of winners for that challenge. And you're going to need to group those by team. So you have to figure out which team had the most of what? Players who beat the challenge goal. And you have to group that by each challenge. So for each challenge, you need to figure out the team that had the most players who won. There's going to be a couple of layers in this one. It's a good practice exercise. So again, I'm not solving these on screen for you because I want you to go out and try to find the answers to these. And what we'll do is in a later video, we'll look at some similar solutions. But use this SQL fiddle to your heart's content. You can load this into your own database, or you can play here in the SQL fiddle. That's fine too. However you want to end up doing it. But either way, happy hunting. All right, that's a wrap on our guide to acing data analyst style interviews. If you found the video helpful, give us a thumbs up, share it, leave a comment. If you have questions or other topics that you'd like to see us go over in the future, feel free to leave a comment and we'll see what we can cover next. Good luck with your interview preparation. Don't forget to check out these other helpful videos and subscribe to our channel for more tech career tips and tutorials.